The world is on edge. A high-level wiretapping scandal shaking Washington and Moscow threatens to upend the future of any peace negotiations. Meanwhile, Europe is bracing for the worst, reinforcing borders, moving heavy equipment and launching a new military Schengen that could change everything. On the front line, the fight takes its own turn. Kupiansk holds firm despite Kremlin lies, and Ukraine's upgraded drones are giving Russian forces new reasons to panic. And while chaos grows at the front, a financial storm hits Russia's home front. Soaring taxes, rising prices in a country where millions already struggle to afford basic food. What does all this mean for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the decisions global leaders must take next? Stay with us, all the details in our special edition of Hotspot. A massive scandal erupts. Steve Witkoff reportedly advised Putin on how to negotiate a peace deal with Trump. Senior officials from both the White House and the Kremlin were allegedly monitored, and the compromising recordings leaked to the press. The key question now: how will this explosive revelation impact potential peace talks between Kyiv and Moscow? All the details in our full report.
Donald Trump's special envoy, Witkoff, is an extremely pro-Russian diplomat. Rumors have long circulated that Steve likes Moscow, where he happily eats chebureki for breakfast. But now Bloomberg has published a transcript of a conversation between Witkoff and Putin's advisor Ushakov, which took place on October 14th. The American directly suggested to the Russian side that they get ahead of Ukraine and talk to Trump before his meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. Donald's friend even advised the Russians on what words to use to win his heart. The heart of the American president.
Witkoff is completely playing on Russia's side, offering strategies and his services, adapting himself to Russia as much as possible. And around Trump, he builds very bizarre, phantom semantic castles against Ukraine. Now, this has become known.
This leak is one of the biggest scandals in Donald's circle during his second coming to the Oval Office. Political experts are surprised at how the Russians are manipulating the Americans.
In the phone conversation, it is Ushakov who comes across as the professional, easily telling Witkoff that Russia, in order to please Trump and recognize his peacemaking efforts, even refused to hold the Russia-Arab summit. But this is a deception, because it was actually the leaders of the Arab countries who refused to go to Moscow, since they started to focus primarily on Trump and only then on Putin. Ushakov calmly presents the defeat of Russian diplomacy to the inexperienced Witkoff as a gesture of goodwill from the Kremlin. And there are many such episodes in these conversations.
A sensational leak like this should have led to personnel changes in Trump's inner circle. But the American president surprised journalists with his apparent indifference. All methods are fair game, Trump assured, justifying himself.
It's a standard thing, you see. He needs to sell this to Ukraine. He needs to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's exactly what he's doing, the one who makes deals.
Amid the scandal, Trump sent Witkoff to negotiations in Moscow and his new representative Driscoll back to engage with the Ukrainian side. According to Donald, there is now no deadline for Zelensky to sign the framework agreement. But, as analysts claim, the US continues to put pressure on Kyiv. The 47th President of America is not opposed to meeting with Zelensky, but only after he puts his signature on the required document. Meanwhile, the media report that Ukrainian diplomats managed to fend off and reword at least 3 points from the document written and translated by Dmitry Witkoff. And during his first visit to the Ukrainian capital, Daniel Driscoll assured Ukrainian military personnel that they would undoubtedly suffer defeat.
As I have said more than once, from the very beginning, the Russians never planned to implement any plan, even if all 28 Russian points had remained unchanged, because the goal of this plan is not to freeze or stop the Russian-Ukrainian war. The purpose of this plan, which was written by the Russians, is to buy time and to prevent the West from imposing even more sanctions on the so-called Russian Federation right now. In the
White House, they are already worried that the Kremlin might completely abandon the updated peace plan. Now it will be interesting to see how Stephen Witkoff's trip to the White Stone will end. What treats will be offered and what rewards will be given to their supporter from Trump's inner circle.
Across Europe, the belief is growing that Russia may attempt to expand its war. NATO countries bordering Russia and Belarus are reinforcing their frontiers, concentrating troops and equipment. To speed up the movement of weapons and military units across member states, a military Schengen zone is being created. At the same time, European defense industries are rapidly restructuring their production, taking cues from Ukraine's wartime model. More on this next.
The threat from the Kremlin is getting closer. The European Union is preparing to confront Putin at the borders with Russia and Belarus. NATO countries are concentrating weapons and manpower. At the same time, members of the European Parliament are seriously working on a military Schengen.
We must show Putin that Europe is no longer associated with impotence and democracy, with weakness.
The Schengen is being prepared in close cooperation with the North Atlantic Alliance. Brussels is taking decisive steps. Among them is a plan to modernize the defense industrial complex. The European Commission has announced the timeline and presented a new package of military mobility measures. This will enable the European army to move quickly across EU territory without facing excessive bureaucracy, especially in the event of a possible threat from Russia.
We will be strong in the defense industry if we are industrially independent, autonomous, and much less fragmented.
Ukraine is acting as an ally. The country will gain access to defense logistics.
We want to expand the military mobility corridors in Ukraine. This would serve as a security guarantee, meaning we could provide faster support if needed.
First of all, it is necessary to modernize the infrastructure, digitize procedures, and increase funding. One of the key challenges for EU countries remains ensuring the rapid transportation of troops to potential combat zones.
We can respond to these threats either symmetrically or asymmetrically. We have the full arsenal of tools at our disposal.
At the moment, the threat to the Baltics remains, and in the event of a sudden escalation, for example, the French army would need to cover about 1,500 kilometers to come to the aid of its allies. Although light units are able to move relatively quickly, heavy equipment requires significantly more time and preparation.
Currently, European bridges and railways are not suited for the rapid movement of tanks, soldiers, and military cargo. If transported from the west to the eastern flank, tanks can get stuck in tunnels, tangled in complex bureaucracy, and bridges may not withstand the passage of these vehicles.
Drawing on the experience of the Russian Federation's war with Ukraine, the European Union has devoted significant attention to modernizing critical infrastructure. Transport routes will be upgraded to dual-use standards so that they can simultaneously serve both civilian and military needs. The military Schengen plays a particularly important role in strengthening the defense of the Eastern Alliance, especially for the Baltic states and Poland.
Everything depends on our stance, whether we can deter the enemy or encourage them to act aggressively.
But not everyone sees the threat from Russia, or they simply try to turn a blind eye to reality by maintaining close ties with the Kremlin dictator Putin.
We're talking about an armament program that will require us to spend every last penny, and this concerns all of Europe. From the statements of several influential leaders, it is quite clear they want to enter the war.
Germany is doing everything it can to help Ukraine, making every effort to equip the Ukrainian armed forces with long-range missile systems, as well as to organize joint production on our territory.
For several months now, we have been working intensively with the Ukrainian government to implement long-range weapons projects. The Ukrainian army is being equipped with such systems. We have agreed not to discuss the details publicly, as we believe that the Russian side should not be informed about the extent of our military support. I can only say that we are doing everything possible to equip the Ukrainian army with weapon systems of the required range. And the number of such systems will increase in the coming weeks and months, if necessary, up to and including the production of such weapons in Ukraine itself.
The European Union's military budget is planned to be increased to more than 17 billion euros. In total, at least 100 billion euros are needed to modernize bridges and tunnels and to fully launch 4 corridors for military needs in the European Union. Putin's words cannot be trusted based on Ukraine's experience.
There's no need to make things up and, based on these inventions, form an opinion about Russia. There's no need to create an image of Russia as the enemy. You've made up this idea that Russia wants to attack NATO. Are you completely out of your mind or what? You're as dumb as this table, honestly. Who came up with this? It's nonsense. Do you understand? It's utter nonsense.
While the dictator is feeding journalists lies, members of the European Parliament are calling for regular joint exercises and loading tests. They want the European Union to follow NATO's example so that rapid reaction forces can respond swiftly to Kremlin aggression.
Kupiansk, which the Kremlin falsely claims to have captured, continues to hold due to the resilience and professionalism of Ukraine's defenders. Despite ongoing assaults and Russian disinformation, the city remains under Ukrainian control. Up next, a look at what is happening inside Kupiansk and across the surrounding areas at this very moment. Watch now.
Ekaterina, another lie from Russian propaganda has trapped Russians in the snare of their own statements.
I can't show the relevant signs or say certain words live on air. But I understand that today, once again, we need to send Putin in the direction of the Russian warship.
The Russian warship? Apparently, the top leadership of the Russian Federation forgot to take their prescribed pills, and they imagined that their troops had blocked 15 battalions of the Ukrainian armed forces and had full control over Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region. This is what the so-called chief of the General Staff, Gerasimov, reported during Bunkerman's visit to one of the command posts of the West Group.
Units of the West Group have liberated the city of Kupiansk and continue to destroy the formations of the armed forces of Ukraine that are encircled on the left bank of the Oskil River.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine refuted the Kremlin's statement, explaining that counter-sabotage operations and special actions to search for and eliminate enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups are still ongoing in the city and its surroundings.
As of today, the Russian occupiers are only on the outskirts. Things are going very badly for them there. I wouldn't say the situation there is easy, and it's certainly not all rosy today. No, today the defense forces are making considerable efforts there to carry out the necessary actions, block the enemy, prevent them from advancing further, and in fact push them back from the tactical positions the Russians managed to seize earlier. And that's happening gradually. We are pushing the enemy back from Kupiansk.
The Russian leadership deliberately makes such statements. First of all, they're trying to show Russians that they supposedly have achievements in Ukraine to justify their losses. Their economy is going to hell, but they want to prove that everything is going according to plan. This is stated by Yuri Fedorenko, commander of the 429th Separate Unmanned Systems Regiment Achilles.
The Kremlin's second goal is to put pressure on Ukrainians. Similar statements make their way into Ukraine's information space. And it is Ukrainians who can be misled if they don't analyze the information. The third goal is to influence Donald Trump, who doesn't understand the details. Back in Alaska, Putin convinced Trump that he would capture all of Donbas and Kupiansk. That's why the Kremlin is now passing off wishful thinking as reality.
The Kupiansk direction remains a difficult spot on the map of Ukraine. In the city itself, the defense forces managed to engage the enemy's assault units and force them into intense urban combat. The enemy is suffering huge losses and cannot advance beyond the outskirts. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops continue, gradually, step by step, block by block, to push the occupiers back to their homeland.
At the moment, in Kupiansk, Russian assault groups are practically cut off from ground supply and ground logistics. Logistics are being carried out using heavy drones. It should be noted that the Russians are using the tactic of infiltrating with small assault groups of up to 3 people, building up their presence, and subsequently attempting to take control specifically of logistics and the location of Ukrainian defense forces. In addition, the occupiers are using the so-called flag-poking tactic. That is, when a group of 2 or 3 people runs into a particular area of Kupiansk that is in the gray zone, meaning the territory is not controlled by either side, they raise the Russian tricolor, film it, and present this as so-called objective control data, supposedly showing that this particular neighborhood of Kupiansk is already directly under the control of the Russian occupation forces.
Right now, the main objective for both sides is to cut off or make logistics as difficult as possible. And despite the complexity of the situation, including weather conditions and a shortage of personnel, Ukrainian defenders are handling this masterfully.
Panic is spreading across Russian media. Ukraine's FP2 strike drone is capable of carrying a 100-kilogram FAB aerial bomb. Moreover, the munition is used in a modified form, without its standard tail section. What this means for Russian positions on the front line, how such a configuration affects the enemy, and why the FP2 triggers such a nervous reaction. All of that is covered in our report.
The Russian Federation's worst nightmare, or rather the reason it can't sleep, is the new Ukrainian strike drone, the FP2. The FP2 is used to strike at the Russian rear. It can also carry an adapted aerial bomb as its warhead.
And the FP2 drone, actually, it's specifically designed for strikes, especially with, in particular, a penetrating warhead. It's not soft like regular drones, no. Instead, as its warhead, it uses a 100-kilogram FAB-100 bomb with the tail section removed. That's right. So this UAV can hit targets quite effectively because the FAB-100, for example, was the main bomb of World War II, the most widely used bomb. That's right. And at the same time, it can strike targets with high precision.
Information about the use of these drones is confirmed both by the occupiers and by the Ukrainian military themselves, who show them in action against the enemy across the Donbas. The OFAB marking indicates that the munition is a high explosive fragmentation type designed to destroy unprotected and lightly protected targets.
The FP2 can strike both stationary targets and, in certain cases, moving targets as well. That's right. And this is a very important point because, for example, you can hit those same Iskander missile launchers as they move into position.
The Ukrainian company Firepoint has introduced the FP2 strike drone in the middle strike class. It repeats the design of the long-range FP1 drone, which is used to strike targets in the rear of the Russian army.
This is, so to speak, a modernization of the long-range FP1 drone, which has a range of up to 1,400 kilometers. And the FP2 has kept the same design, but is smaller in size. So apparently it has a smaller wingspan. That's it. And its range is limited to 200 kilometers. This is where the main bulk of army and frontline level warehouses and logistics centers are located. That's it. That's why this strike zone is very important.
Manufacturers offer the system both with a classic stationary launcher and a mobile version for rapid deployment, disguised as a regular army truck.
You can drive up as close as possible, say 10 kilometers from the front line, quickly launch, and quickly leave the strike zone.
It is noted that the relative affordability and availability of the drone, combined with its heavy warhead, allows Ukraine to a certain extent to compensate for the shortage of high-precision missile weaponry.
The FP2 can be considered a high-precision munition. Why is that? It is equipped with a high-quality camera, and for example, at a distance of about 10 kilometers away from the front line, a relay device is suspended in the air to assist with communication. And this drone flies like an FPV. That is, it has a camera on board and strikes the target with precision. In other words, the operator sees the target before striking it.
Experts point out that due to their low flight altitude and sheer numbers, drones can bypass and overwhelm the Russian army's air defense systems, which in certain situations can be even more effective than strikes from HIMARS missile systems.
Russians barely had any money before, and now they're about to have even less. A second VAT increase in just 7 years, which will push Russia into the global top tier for this tax, is set to hit consumers with a financial blow measured in hundreds of billions of rubles. Meanwhile, a third of Russians already admit they don't have enough money for basic food. All the details ahead.
Another tax reform is being prepared in Russia, and its main purpose has already been made clear. The budget needs more money, and since there's really nowhere else to get it, the population will have to pay.
The money will go to defense and security. In other words, in bureaucratic terms, to war and the fight against dissent.
The government has approved raising VAT to 22%, and this measure is expected to bring the treasury more than 1 trillion rubles in the very first year. The wording sounds careful: optimization of the tax burden. In reality, it means an increase in the price of almost everything people buy.
Potatoes. It's just a disaster. I already can't afford to buy cabbage for myself unless it's absolutely necessary. And potatoes now, that's a real problem.
Chicken, damn, that's just a whole other story. Chicken meat is already expensive, and don't even get me started on turkey. And fish, it's like 500 and up.
I'm outraged about potatoes. Why are potatoes so expensive?
Russia is entering 2026 in a situation where real incomes have been falling for the 5th year in a row, and the poverty rate just keeps rising. More and more Russian families are complaining that they don't have enough money for even the most basic groceries. Yeah.
If it weren't for the kids, I would have just starved to death. Honestly, that's the truth.
They won't let you do anything. If someone tries to speak up, they'll shut them up real quick. That's how our government knows how to do things, right?
Officials are trying to prove that so-called socially significant goods won't get more expensive. However, there are no isolated segments in the Russian economy. If taxes go up for businesses and services, logistics, packaging, rent, and equipment all become more expensive. This affects the final prices even for those goods that were supposed to remain stable.
It's sad, of course, and it will have an impact. Investor, it's basically a tax on poverty. It's paid by grandmothers, and corporations get it back.
Business is also under threat, especially small and medium-sized enterprises.
First of all, the threshold for receiving VAT benefits is being reduced by 6 times. Secondly, all enterprises in the sector, except those operating in certain industries prioritized by the state, will lose preferential rates when making payments to social funds.
Profitability for small businesses is already low, and the VAT increase will become yet another risk factor. For some, it will be the last straw. Those who can will pass the costs on to consumers. Those who can't will leave the market.
The new amendments deal a significant, if not severe, blow to small and medium-sized businesses, which will lose a number of benefits currently in effect.
The share of military spending in the budget has reached record levels, and every new month requires additional funds. Economists warn that under such a scenario, by the end of 2026, the country could face both high inflation and declining incomes at the same time. For the population, this means further impoverishment, and for the economy, a lack of development.
The funniest part is that officials even claim that the amendments submitted to the government will benefit the economy, since they will supposedly allow the Bank of Russia to lower the key interest rate. First of all, expecting that any tax increase could, in principle, put the economy on a higher growth trajectory is simply foolish.
The irony is that the VAT increase is presented as a necessary measure, but for those who have long been living on the brink of poverty, it is yet another confirmation that the state system is set up so that the most vulnerable end up being the main sponsors of the budget.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Farafonova. Even more hellish frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!